white husts hochalt, tlachach tlahap salachalacht simxilch, yel michum chichamala stamia menimchil, imcha isquis tichnit, kin silch sihuapm. Good day, elders, family, friends, leaders, young people, two-spirit, and non-binary folks. My name is Tichnit, and I am from the Syilx and Sihuapm nations. My English name is Elaine Alec, and my Syilx name, my Insyilxchen name that was given to me on the day I was born is Tichnit, which means standing by water. I always start off introducing myself in the language for a number of reasons, but one of the things that I've recently just started to do is I learned how to say stamia and menimchil in my language. And stamia means two-spirit, and menimchil means non-binary folks. And one of the things that I've learned in the work that I've been doing over the last few years is that, sorry, I'm doing a little bit of double duty here. One of the things that I've learned over the last few years is that 1 in 5 of our Indigenous relatives identify as 2S-LGBTQIA+. And there are many of our relatives who do not identify as she or he. And we have many relatives who identify as non-binary. And so one of the things that I've also learned as we've started to talk and share our language and how, you know, proper grammar and proper English has really been brought forward to tell us, you know, how to speak and how to form our sentences, is when I think about our elders, you know, growing up, and when they talked about things and they referred to people, they were always saying them over there, you know, that person there. And they were always using them and they when they were explaining who was standing over there. And it was only through the introduction of English that we started using pronouns in the way that we did our work. And so I just wanted to start off by sharing that, because a lot of the work that I'm doing, we talk about matriarchs. A lot of the work we do, we talk about grandmothers groups and grandfathers groups, or aunties and uncles. And when we do that, we're excluding our relatives who do not identify as grandmother, grandfather, auntie or uncle. And so when we share those terms, to also include grandparents and siblings and relatives are really simple terms to start using to make sure that we're not excluding. Because some of the work that I talk about today is about the 4 tools used for colonization, and exclusion is one of the tools of colonization. And so to really look at all aspects of how we do things to include people. So I'm just going to announce again that when you sign in, you don't get muted. So if you're just signing in now, just make sure that you're muting yourself. Also, I wanted to share that I am in a hotel room right now. My daughter is in a dance competition in Abbotsford. And so I'm pulling double duty here. And so I got distracted for a minute there because my daughter came in for a second, and then she tried to FaceTime me and it popped up on my computer.
Aaliyah's mom is going to drop me off at the competition.
Okay, so she's just made plans for herself to get dropped off at competition. So thank you everybody for being here today, and for that bit of an awkward introduction. One of the things that I also want to share is that I introduced myself in that way for a number of reasons. 1, because my elders told me to. 2, I was told to speak my language in every public forum that I can, because there was a time when my parents and grandparents were punished for doing so. And 3, I talk about who I am and who my ancestors are because it calls them into the space with me. So I never, ever, ever write any of my talks. I never prepare for my talks ever. Whenever I share, I speak from the heart. And so when I introduce myself, I will say, good day, elders, friends, relatives, leaders, young people, two-spirit, and non-binary folks. My name is Tithkanit, and I'm from the Syilx and Secwepemc Nations. My name is Elaine Alec. My late father was Saul Kenzie Basil from the Bonaparte Indian Band from the Secwepemc Nation. He was the son of Saul and Louisa Basil. My late mother was Sophie Alec from the Penticton Indian Band from the Syilx Nation. She was the daughter of the late Chief Jack Alec and Elaine Alec. My grandfather, Jack Alec, was our first elected chief for the Penticton Indian Band because he was married to my tama. When the Indian Act came in to introduce chief and council systems, women were not allowed to be in an elected position. And so the matriarchs in our community came together and chose my grandfather because he was married to my tama, who was the daughter of Surimt, who was our hereditary chief. If you've ever been in British Columbia and you've driven along Okanagan Lake into Penticton, BC, you'll see a provincial park called Surimt Provincial Park. That's named after my great grandfather, and it means moonlight glistening off the water. He was our last recognized hereditary chief. Currently, Adam Enius is our current hereditary chief for our area, and we are descendants of Pithpakchentin and Pelkamulach. Pelkamulach was one of our great hereditary chiefs from Washington State. Our nation extends from British Columbia into Washington State, but of course, because of the border, we're now divided, and they're called Colville and we're called Okanagan. But he was a chief who had 24 wives, and he had wives from across the state of Washington into British Columbia, as far north as Williams Lake, from the Rockies over to the mountains. And so if you're Indigenous from any of those areas, there's a really good chance that we might be related. And so I share that because one of the things people don't understand why our hereditary leaders married and had so many wives. And a lot of that had to do with relationships and agreements between nations. And so when we married between tribes and when we married between nations, it formed an agreement for us to be able to move in and out of each other's territories, to hunt, to gather, to do things, to live. And everybody understood within those territories that they were married into what the protocols were to be in that space. They knew who they had to talk to if they wanted to hunt there. They knew who they had to talk to if they wanted to gather berries or dig roots or fish. And they knew the people that they had to go to do those things in order to ensure regeneration of the land. And so it was necessary for our communities to have those protocols and agreements in place for us to thrive and for us to understand how to regenerate the land. And one of the responsibilities that we have is that for our people is wherever we know the language to, and in Syilxchin for my mom's people, from the Okanagan people, wherever we know the Syilxchin name for that mountain, for that rock, for that mountain, the water, though that means we are responsible for that land. We are responsible for that water. We know the stories and the laws and how to take care of that place. We know how to regenerate it, and we know how to build a reciprocal relationship with that area. And so that's why it's important for us to have these relationships and to understand these protocols, because the people who are from that place know how to take care of that place. And so that brings me to one of the important teachings that I've learned, is that the health of the people is a reflection of the health of the land. And the health of the land is a reflection of the health of the people. The health of the family, the health of the community, the health of the nation, the health of the land is all a reflection of the health of the individual. And so when I think about where we're at today, so many of us are helpers. So many of us want to find out how we're supposed to change things, how we're supposed to fix things, how we're supposed to make things better. So we wear 20 different hats. We work 12, 18-hour days, working on fixing things, working on helping things, working on ways to make them better. So we focus on, how do I help my family? How do I save my family? How do I fix my family? How do I help my community? How do I save my community? We're in the middle of a climate crisis. What are we doing for the land? How are we going to do that? How do we speak up? How do we advocate for that? And we're spending all of this time doing this work over and over and over again, having these same conversations, asking the same questions. And the reality is that we have stopped focusing on the center of our system, which is individual. Our nested systems, are built on individual, family, community, land. Individual, family, community, nation, land. The way you do one thing is the way you do everything. Whatever you do in any of those areas impacts everything else. We know because of the pandemic, there has been, all of these people sharing about like an increase in mental health issues, an increase of depression, an increase in drug use and alcoholism. And the reality is that that's not new. It's not because of the pandemic. It was always there. It was just amplified because when the world stopped, people were forced to look at themselves. People were forced to be with themselves. They couldn't hide behind work. They couldn't hide behind busy. They couldn't hide behind, going and doing things. And, people were stuck dealing with themselves. And that can be traumatic if you don't know how to do that work. And if you are not used to feeling feelings. And so many of us human beings do not know how to feel feelings. We're taught by colonial systems that it's wrong to feel feelings, that this is a professional workspace and this is a personal workspace. They're not the same thing. And that's BS. We're human beings. And in any space that we occupy, every time that we're asked to leave a piece of ourself behind, we're harming ourselves. We're putting ourselves in positions that allows us to, be harmed because, we just have to suck it up. You just have to accept it. If you can't handle it, you don't have a thick enough skin. And so, I think about where we're at today as a society and where we're at, after this pandemic and looking at the climate crisis and looking at all of these crises happening and people wanting to do all of this work. And when I think about our elders and how they always said, keep it simple. Keep it simple. That you can't change anyone else. I don't know how many spiritual help gurus have said this over and over again. The only thing you can change is yourself. And that's it. And so when we say that the health of the people is a reflection of the health of the land is a reflection of the health of the people, that's the work that we need to do. And so I get asked by our settler allies all the time, what can Canadians do to help Indigenous people? And that's right there is the issue. Indigenous people make up 3% of the population. If there is a problem in Canada, it is not Indigenous people. Indigenous people are not the ones who need to be saved. Indigenous peoples are not the ones who need to be helped. And if anything, we are a step ahead of the rest of the Canadian population when it comes to being healed and saved. Because one of the really important things when it comes to healing is having a strong sense of identity and a strong sense of belonging. As Indigenous people, even if we don't have the confidence in all of those things yet, we have an inner confidence because we have this strong sense of belonging to this land. This is the land that we come from. This is the land that our ancestors come from. These are we belong to a people and a nation. We belong to the families and the communities and the histories and the stories of this land. That is a deep, deep sacred sense of belonging and identity. And so when I talk about reconciliation, the biggest mistake that Canadians can make is focus on the healing of Indigenous people. Because we have everything we need here. We have the stories, we have the tools, we have the work, we have the medicine, we have the land, we have these things that helps us, really dig in to figure out how do we work through, these really hard things that are happening to us. And I challenge people, there's two questions my people ask when we make important decisions about anything. The first question is Sweetan we. And that question means, who are you? And one of the things I share about our language, people think that, Indigenous people, we do a lot of storytelling and we talk a long time. It's because one of our words is a story. One of our words is a descriptive story that tells you when, who, where, what the weather was like, everything about the condition of that word. And there's instruction in that word. And so that's why our people say you cannot lie in our language. You cannot lie in our language because they are too descriptive. When you say something, that is what it means. With English, one word means 20 different things to 20 different people. It can be interpreted and people get offended all the time by English words because people make it something for themselves. And then somebody else says the same word and they have no clue that that means something. And then there's conflict. And then it becomes about right or wrong, good or bad. You offended me. You triggered me. And it puts it on the other person. And it makes us not accountable and responsible for ourselves and our own feelings and things. And so, so that first question, Sweetan we, is who are you? But it also is asking, who are you? Who are your relatives? Tell us who your parents are. Tell us what nation you're from. We want to know the land you come from. And we want to know what your purpose is here. Because if you are about to make an important decision about something, you need to know who you are. You need to know what you're doing here. And you need to be strong and confident in your voice when you put it forward. Because there's going to be people that don't think like you here. There's going to be people who are doing things in the same way, and you're going to want to do things differently. And you need to be confident enough in who you are to say what's on your heart, even if it's not like everybody else, even if there's a chance you might be rejected, even if there's a chance you think somebody might judge you. That is why that question is so important. Sweetan we, who are you? Who do you belong to? And then even that word, people get worked up about, I don't belong to anybody. They get triggered by that. But who do you belong to? Who is your family? What land do you belong to? It's the best English way that I can say, like, who are you? And that can be triggering for so many settler allies because this is going to hurt. They're going to want to say I'm Canadian. And what sucks is that that's not the question we're asking. Canadian is not the identity that people need to have to make important decisions. But we hold on tight to that identity. We're Canadian. What does that mean? What does it mean to be that? And, we can come up with a whole bunch of patriotic statements and stuff like that, but what does it mean? How does it impact the way you show up in this space to make decisions for yourself, your family, your community, your nation, the land? I was not raised to believe I have individual rights. I was raised to believe in communal responsibility. And part of that communal responsibility is how I show up as an individual, as part of a family, as part of my community, as part of my nation, as part of the land. And that every decision I make impacts all of those things as much as I want to say that it doesn't. And so, you know, all of these things, you know, freedom is a triggering word now. Canadian flags are triggering. You know, when I go somewhere and I see a Canadian flag, I don't know if I'm safe. And I actually get anxiety and I become afraid every time I see a Canadian flag now. And so, you know, thinking about all of these things, about who am I? The second question we ask is stima spo'us. And that means, what is on your heart? That is an acknowledgement that your heart is important, that feelings are important, that emotions are important when you're in a place to make decisions. I was raised by my elders, and Grand Chief Stuart Phillip is my adopted dad. And the first time Grand Chief Stuart Phillip made me talk was when I was 10 years old at a nation meeting of all the Okanagan chiefs in the nation, when they started introducing self-government and when West Bank started talking about self-government, and our nation came together to talk about it. And he always told me, speak from the heart. I don't want to ever see you write anything down. Always speak from the heart. When you speak from the heart, you can't lie. When you work from the head, you can lie. You can tell a little white lie. You can say something you don't really mean. You know, you can write a speech. But my daughter keeps trying to FaceTime me. So, you know, that was the important part of it, is that you have to listen and then you have to speak from the heart. One thing I've learned about white supremacy and white supremacy characteristics is the need for perfection and the need to know everything. So even as an Indigenous woman, of course, somebody who went to school, somebody who's been raised in the society, I strive for perfection. I strive to know everything before I make a decision. And so, you know, unlearning that and trusting community, trusting family, trusting other people, that everybody has a role in this world and that there's no right or wrong, good or bad, that everybody has purpose and they're here to do things, you know, in whatever way that they need to do it, and that it might not always look like me, and that I need to trust people. One of the things people want to do is they want to understand, why did you do it that way? Why do you think we should do that? Can you validate that to me? Because that before we move forward, or wait, I need to learn more about this before we move forward with this. The need to know everything, the need to understand, the need to have it perfect before we move forward. That's a colonial structure. That's a patriarchal structure. Those are white supremacy characteristics that everybody does. People, you know, when I say that, people automatically like, oh, you're calling me a racist? You're calling me a white supremacist? That has nothing to do with it. You know, when I use those terms, right? It's something we all do. It's something we all have. And it's why, you know, we're in the situation we're in now. And so when I talk about cultivating safe spaces, I also talk about decolonizing. And so, you know, a little bit, when I open up my talk and I say, I never plan anything, I never prepare anything, but I say the names of my ancestors out loud because I believe it calls them into the space with me. And I believe that when I'm scared and when I'm intimidated, my ancestors are the ones that help me say the words that I need to say, because they know what people need to hear in this space. And so I just trust that. I just trust that whatever I share and whatever direction, you know, my speaking goes into, that's the way it needs to go. But, you know, I grew up on the reserve, on the Penticton Indian Band Reserve. And I grew up with my Tama for the first 6 years of my life. And she only spoke in Silkchin. Like, she only spoke in Silkchin. At bedtime, she rubbed my back and like told me stories about the land. She told me stories about coyotes. She told me stories about all of those things that I didn't know were laws and ways of being. I didn't know what my Tama was teaching me when I was little. She was teaching me strong identity, strong sense of belonging. And she would tell me those stories, and at night she would, you know, make me go outside. I was like 4 years old, and she'd say, "Oh, I forgot my handkerchief by the woodpile. Can you go get it?" And I remember going to the bottom of the steps and like trying to look and had a flashlight, trying to peer into the dark, trying to see something and being so scared and then running back up the steps. And I remember being coached that when you're there and you feel that shiver down your back, down your spine, stay there. Don't run. When you feel that shiver up your back, you stay there, because that is your spirit helper coming to you. That is your spirit helper coming to you. And I thought, wow, thinking about it now, 4 years old, our elders were teaching us, feel the fear, face the fear, and do it anyway. Feel the fear, face the fear, and do it anyway. The other thing that they made us do was go to the water and walk along the water, because that was where we would find our spirit helper. Or whenever we had a big problem, we had to go to the water and stand there. And I remember being little, because the thing is, you go to your elders, and I remember, you know, going to my elders and they'd tell me to go to the water, and I'd get so mad because I had a really big problem. I had a big question that I needed them to answer for me. And they would send me to the water and they'd say, just go stand by the water. So I'd stand by the water and I'd look for eagles and I'd look for a sign and I'd look for some great spirit to come talk to me and tell me what I was supposed to be doing. Like, is this when I'm supposed to get my spiritual awakening? Is this like, you know, when we go fasting, we get this great message. When is this going to happen to tell me what I'm supposed to do? So this is part of the work that I do in my teachings about this, is like, I did that for so many years until I was like in my 40s when I finally realized why they did that. I didn't know. But what I learned about trauma and stress, cumulative stress and trauma, whenever you're perplexed, whenever you're struggling, whenever you're depressed, whenever something's going on, whenever you can't focus and think, you move into your trauma brain, the lower stem of your brain. And when you're in that part of your brain, you can't focus, you can't concentrate, you can't be solutions-based, you're negative, you only see problems. And the only way to get out of the trauma brain is to cultivate a sense of safety. And so if you've ever stood by the water, and if you can just take a moment to think about that. Water is so powerful. Even thinking about water, that feeling that's coming over you, that peace, that safety. When you stand by the water, you move from the lower part of your brain to the top part of your brain that is creative, that is solutions-based, that is effective. And all of a sudden you have the answer. All of a sudden you have the answer to your question, your struggle, because you've been able to move yourself into this part of the brain. The other part of that is that no matter what it is that you're dealing with, no matter what it is that you are struggling with, the only person that has the answer is you. Our elders were teaching us, feel the fear, face the fear, and do it anyway. And that you were born with everything that you will ever need in this lifetime. And to remember that. confidence, sense of belonging, identity. I didn't learn what my name meant until 2 years ago. So if you remember what my name was, Tikhkanit, it means standing by water. I would say, what does that mean? And they would say, you'll know one day. You'll know. And I used to get so mad at my tama and my uncles and my mom for not telling me what my name meant. The names in my family are passed down generation to generation. We carry the same names in our family. We're renamed after our ancestors, and we're told that we carry a piece of our ancestors every time we get that name and receive that name, and then we add on to it, and then the name is passed on after we're gone. And our ancestors still live, and so that helps me with grief and loss. When I lose somebody, you know, it's so deeply inside of me. I was born with that teaching that they're gone, but they're still here. That I can call my ancestors into the space anytime I need them. And that these words that I'm sharing don't belong to me. These words I'm sharing come from my ancestors. They come from my mom. They come from my dad, because both my mom and dad are gone now. And I used to remember like being little, like, I can't wait. My dad was part of the American Indian movement and shut down the Department of Indian Affairs office in Vernon, BC in 1974. And he was asked to travel all across the country. And he helped bring Leonard Peltier across the border back before he was arrested. And then of course, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip is my adopted dad. So, you know, I grew up with these amazing like warriors, right? And like these fearless people. And I remember just being little thinking, oh, I can't wait to be like that one day. I can't wait to just be so courageous that I just say whatever I want without worrying about what anybody else is going to think about me. So, you know, growing up, I grew up with some amazing people, amazing teachings, but my mom was a practicing alcoholic. And so I was raised around alcoholism. You know, I've been abused. I've been sexually abused, emotionally abused, physically abused from the age of 4 to 10, not just by one person, but by many people in my community. And it was just something that happened and nobody talked about it. And so when I went to school and I would talk about the things I learned as a kid, you know, I went to school with mostly white people and the kids would make fun of me. That's so weird. What does that even mean? You know, everything I said, even the teachers told me that I was strange. And you know, I was, the first time I heard wagon burner and squaw was when I was 5 years old by another 5-year-old kid. And I was told that I was stupid, and I was told that I was dirty, and I was told that I was ugly. And I was told that every day of my life in elementary school, right into grade 7. And so when you hear those things every day, guess what? You start to believe it. And so I believed I was dirty, I was ugly, I was stupid. And so I started drinking. I started smoking at 10, drinking by 12, hitchhiked on the highway of tears at the age of 12, slept on the side of the highway, you know, did a lot of things, started drinking. I was violent and abusive, got into fist fights in the middle of the street, got thrown in the back of cop cars, abusive to the people I was with. I got pregnant when I was 17. I had my son when I was 18. I quit drinking for a little bit, but I had done tons of things, tons of illegal things, breaking and entering, you know, stealing cars, like all of those things. And people in my community started to gossip about me. I lost my virginity at the age of 12. At the time, I thought it was consensual. But, you know, now I realize, oh, I'm 12. It's nothing consensual about that at all. But, you know, all of these things, because I believed all of these things about me. I was dirty, I was ugly, I was stupid. My mom didn't love me because she was drinking so much. She always left me. My dad wasn't there. I got pregnant, had my son, got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 21. And it got so bad that I attempted suicide because I couldn't walk down the stairs. I couldn't brush my own hair. I couldn't do anything for myself. And the moment that I attempted suicide, you know, I was laying in my room and all of a sudden I heard the door open and it was my son's laughter. And I snapped to it for a minute, enough to ask my boyfriend at the time to bring me to the hospital. We were living in complete poverty. Like we barely, sometimes we would have electricity, sometimes we wouldn't, a lot of times we didn't have food. We had like an old res bomber, you know, that was like barely working, no insurance, windshield wipers didn't work, headlights didn't work, barely had gas, but we used that car to drive me to the hospital because I didn't want my community members to know what I had done because I didn't want them gossiping about me. I cared more about what my community members thought about me than my own life in that moment. That's a reality of so many people in our communities. So when I got to the hospital, my doctor said, you don't have to live in pain anymore. And the way he looked at me, I knew he was talking about my emotional pain and not just my physical pain from my RA. And in that moment, I decided to have hope. Never had had hope that whole time because of all the abuse, all the things that had happened to me, all the anger, everything. My dad passed away when I was 18 and my mom had a massive stroke. She had 2 major aneurysms in her brain. And so very angry at the world. So I started to get healthy. I started to do well. I had a hard time staying sober because I couldn't process the feelings and the trauma yet. So I tried off and on until I was 30, finally got sober at 30. October 10th was my 14-year sobriety birthday. But I remember, you know, in those first years of sobriety, you start feeling things, get anxiety because you're feeling stuff. You're not, you know, you drink because you want to numb out. You don't want to deal with things. So you have a drink, and some people don't stop drinking. Some people can have one drink. What I've learned is there are normal people who can have one drink, who can have 2 drinks and stop and it doesn't consume their lives. It took me a long time to realize that because I don't get that at all. My brain is like, if it's there, you drink it till it's gone. Like, I don't know how to stop. And so I don't. But, you know, learning through all those things, I did this really hard work in healing. I was part of the Indigenous Youth Internship Program. I became an Indigenous Youth Intern when I was 29, just on the verge of aging out and, you know, not being a youth anymore. And worked for MCFD, and then I ran for chief. And then I started like getting all of these experiences and learning to do things. And was feeling really good about myself. And then I started working with our chief for the comprehensive community plan, which like skyrocketed my career, the work that I did in comprehensive community planning. Went to a big event where there were a bunch of chiefs and ministers and, you know, really important people. And, you know, wanting to be prepared. I did this presentation. I knocked it out of the park. My first biggest thing ever. Walked out of the event. I was standing outside, and this older, well-respected leader, chief, who I had known since I was a kid, who knew my family, I knew his family, came up and he put his hand on my butt and said, I'm really proud of you, and then gave me a hug. And it felt funny for a second, but I was like, oh, it was an accident. He didn't mean to do that. Went separate ways, realized I forgot something, ran away, came back, ran to the elevator, and he was in the elevator and I didn't know he was already in the elevator. He opened up the doors for me and said, I would stop the world for you, or something like that. And I got in the elevator and there was someone else in there. They got off on the next floor, and this well-respected Indigenous leader came forward and grabbed me in an embrace that was completely inappropriate and made a really inappropriate sound in my ear when he hugged me. And I remember pushing myself away and kind of laughing it off and rushing out of the elevator and just feeling it like something was wrong about that. And then telling a friend at dinner that night, and he said, that's sexual assault. And I said, no, that's not sexual assault. Sexual assault is rape. It's violent. You know, that's not what that was. And he said, well, maybe you should talk to somebody. So what happened after that is I couldn't wake up. I couldn't get out of bed. I went into this deep depression. And what I didn't realize was I was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was acting like I was 14. And guess what? I started acting like a 14, 15-year-old, having inappropriate conversations with men. You know, I was newly single, 36 years old, and I was behaving in a way that, you know, and I felt I was going crazy. And I didn't want to be left alone with my daughter, who was 4 at the time. And I thought there was something wrong with me and that I needed to go into a mental health institute. I couldn't work. I ended up getting let go from my position because I couldn't deliver on my deadlines. Realized that what I was experiencing was PTSD, wrote a letter to this person through my work. They set up a mediation and I ended up coming face to face with him. And we sat in a room with a mediator and I said, I want to talk first. And I told him my whole life story. And I told him, when you did what you did, this is what it did to me, and it almost killed me. You know, you might think it's not a big deal, but this is what it did to me. And what I want from you is to never touch another woman like that ever again. Because they said, what do you want from him? And I said, that's what I want. And I knew that if I didn't meet him face to face to talk to him, that I would never be able to continue to do the work that I do, that I had to do it. And there were a lot of reasons why I had to do it. A lot of the people that I shared my story with, I told this man that I would share the story. I would never disclose his name because shame is a colonial tactic. And when I told him that I was also doing this because I loved him enough to tell him that what he did to me, how it affected me, he started to cry. He went through a whole box of Kleenex, and then he told me about his experience in residential school. I want to share this little thing that I'm being compelled to share. And I think about reconciliation and focusing on the healing of Indigenous people only. Where did those priests come from? What was happening to those priests, and where did they come from? Many of them came from war. And if you've heard the stories and horrors of what has happened to people in war, and what happened to orphan children, and what they were put through, and when they were put away in orphanages and places like that, where they were abused and brutalized, and then put on ships, kids displaced from their lands and their home territories and brought to Canada. Hurt people hurt people. You know, everybody heals in their own way. People need to do what they need to do for themselves, and it's going to look different to everybody. That's the thing I really want to share when it comes to violence against each other, especially violence against women and girls. You know, a lot of it's about power. It's taking power from another human. It's powerless people trying to take power from somebody else because they've had their power taken away from them at one point in their life. To assault and abuse another human being is power. And so what can we do, you know, about all of these things? It really has to come from within first. You cannot fix anybody. You cannot save anybody, and you cannot heal anybody. The only thing that you can do for anybody else is to heal yourself. Ask yourself, who am I? Where do I come from? What is my purpose? What am I good at? What is on my heart? When people ask me how to decolonize, again, elders keep it simple. Colonial structures and systems are built on fear and control. The 4 tools for colonization is to promote sickness and death, to promote exclusion, to promote shame, and to promote oppression. Those are the 4 tools used to colonize. And colonization is built on fear and control. So how do we decolonize? How do we cultivate safe spaces for all human beings? Is that we do the opposite of those things. We learn to promote well-being of mind, body, and spirit. We promote inclusion, we promote freedom, and we promote validation. And instead of working from a place of fear and control, work from a place of love, trust, and faith. So that simple question, when I'm doing work in decolonizing, when I'm making this decision, when I'm coming up with these questions, when I'm hosting this event, when I'm hosting this meeting, when I'm creating these questions in this agenda, am I doing this from a place of fear and control? If you're using Robert's Rules of Orders, you're using fear and control. Or am I doing this work from a place of love, trust, and faith? And the only way that we can do work from a place of love, trust, and faith is to be confident in who we are. Know who we are, know who I am, know I am here, know I am doing this work. I do a lot of work with governments. I do a lot of work with provincial and federal governments. Whole bunch of people working from fear and control, afraid to make mistakes, afraid to get demoted, afraid to get moved somewhere else, afraid to get slapped on the hand, slapped on the wrist, whatever that is. You know, just a whole bunch of people making a whole bunch of, and then people are putting their fear on top of everybody else, and then everybody's worked up in fear. Guess what happens when you keep working from fear? You start to move to that lower part of your brain. That's a trauma brain. Whole bunch of government people working from their trauma brain, working with our people, making very important decisions. How do we help Indigenous people? We're not the problem. I think I'm going to stop there. I didn't realize I was going to speak this long. Like I said, I never prepare what I'm going to say or how I'm going to say it or what's going to come out, but that's what happens. I just want to take the time to say thank you to each and every one of you. You know, from that work that I did, that experience I had with that individual, I started speaking up at Chiefs Council meetings. I went to UBCIC, I went to BCAFN, I went to the Leadership Council meetings, and I spoke to all of the chiefs. And I said, this is what happened to me, and this is what it did to me. And I heard over 2,000 women, especially women in policy, who shared with me that every single one of them had been assaulted by someone in leadership. In all governments, not just Indigenous governments. Every single woman that I have worked with has been assaulted in some way. And the more we talk about it, the more we empower each other, that's how we reclaim our power, you know, by sharing our story. It doesn't have to be big and grand, doesn't have to be in front of 299 people. Can be with one person. I became the Union of BC Indian Chiefs Women's Representative for 3 years. I worked with the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General on the Path Forward report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, 2S LGBTQIA+. You can find that report on pathforward.ca. We did a lot of work around community work and coming of age and the recommendations, and that work inspired me to write my book. I wrote a book called Calling My Spirit Back. And that work that I did traveling across the province, talking about MMIWG, 2S LGBTQIA+, that book was inspired. I felt a sense of responsibility to write that book because of that experience. From that book, I've created training called Cultivating Safe Spaces. And I train people to do the work that I do, because after I did that work, I got called across Canada to do this work everywhere. And I just don't have the energy. I'm 44 now, it's not old, but it's older, and I don't like traveling as much anymore. And a 4-hour trip east is really hard on my body. It takes me days to recover afterwards. So I just finished doing my first Train the Trainer. And I now have 10 certified Cultivating Safe Spaces facilitators. And I have online courses as well to teach people how to do the work that I do around cultivating safe spaces and decolonizing and taking this work forward. I'm a grade 9 dropout. I dropped out of school in grade 9. People ask me, what degree do you have? What did you do? You know, how did you get to where you do? I have 2 companies now. One last year, we brought in over $2.5 million. My other company is doing pretty well as well, but I'm a girl from the res, struggled with, you know, alcoholism, mental health. You know, I'm on anxiety medication. I deal with my mental health every day. You know, I've got 3 kids. It's a struggle. I get triggered every day, but I don't let my triggers stop me. I don't use triggers as an excuse to not do something. Triggers are something for me to work through so that they don't control me anymore, so that I can continue to move forward in my life and be who I was meant to be in this world. So I always challenge triggers. I have a hard time with people saying that they don't want to do things because of triggers. It's tough. It's hard work. I'm not going to say like it sucks. Of course you don't want to do it. You don't want to hear it. You don't want to do that hard work because it sucks. It's really, really hard to do. But I encourage you, if you've been triggered by my story in any way, that it's not your story to hold on to. It's mine. It's my story, my experience. And if it's bringing up something from you, for you, go to the water. Go to the water, let the water help you. Even go into the bathroom and run a shower. Your best ideas come in the shower, right? I've got 3 minutes left. I don't want to keep going, but thank you to each and every one of you who has spent your time with me today, listening to me share these stories from my ancestors and my people, and every single person that's ever sat in a circle with me makes me who I am. These do not belong to me. They belong to everybody that's ever taken the time to share with me. So wait them.
Elaine, you actually do have another 32 minutes.
Oh, I could start, I could keep talking, or we could answer some questions.
There are some questions if you wanted to go ahead. I will reiterate them to you, the ones that I have received. But I just wanted to take a moment to thank you again for sharing your story. You can tell it comes from a very, very powerful place. And you know, I was holding back tears for some of your words. So I just want to say thank you again. I know I've received quite a bit of comments forward to myself about how wonderful and moving your words have been. So I'm just going to say a couple questions that I received. So someone asked, would love to know how Elaine would recommend starting to move into a space of falling forward, working through the perfectionism into a place of being comfortable with being wrong, and then making repercussions when we catch ourselves being wrong.
One of the things I had prepared, not prepared, but I have ready to go all the time because I often refer to it as this diagram, and I'll share this diagram in the chat. But this diagram is my Cultivating Safe Spaces diagram. And in the center of the circle, there are 4 necessary conditions for cultivating safe space. The first is understanding self. You cannot cultivate a safe space unless you are a safe space. And I say cultivate a safe space. I never say create a safe space, because I cannot create safe spaces and I cannot guarantee a safe space for anybody. But I can put forward protocols for people to help cultivate safe spaces. I'll share this in the chat. So you, or I don't know if I can, I'll share it in the chat. I think people will be able to download it. I'm not sure about this format. The second is love-based practice. Again, colonialism is based in fear and control. So working from a love-based practice. Patience, patience for self first. And then patience for others. If you're hard on people, it's because you're hard on yourself. If there's people in your life that are really hard on you, it's because it's a reflection of how hard they are on themselves. Working from a place of patience. When you can't focus, when you can't think, when you're feeling so annoyed that you can't do something, it's probably because you're in your trauma brain. Be patient with yourself. I always say there's no problem employees ever. They're probably working from their trauma brain. And when I have somebody I'm working with, or I'm working with a community member or an employee who's being a problem, the question I ask myself is, am I cultivating a safe space for this person? If someone's being a problem, they're probably experienced trauma or vicarious trauma, which is all the things around lateral violence and bullying and undesirable behaviors from somebody are usually indicators that they're in their trauma brain. And so, and then if you take an HR route on them, you're just going to push them further into their trauma brain, and then that's it. And nobody feels good about that. The fourth necessary condition is disciplined listening. I do planning work all across the country. I've been in lots of big meetings. People have talked for 4 hours, arguing, debating, going back and forth. At the end of the meeting, they say, oh, what are we going to do about this problem? What are we going to do now? And then I've cried in a few of them because I was listening to them. And I was like, if you had been listening to each other, you'd realize you came up with the answer, but you're just going back and forth trying to prove each other wrong. Each of you has a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the answer. If you just listened. As a planner, when I do strategic plans, top 3 recommendations are improved communications. We need a communications plan. Again, you would not have a communications problem if you practice disciplined listening. Disciplined listening. Can you listen to each and every person that's in this meeting, in this space, without judging what they're saying as right or wrong, good or bad? And can you listen to everybody in the space without your head wandering, your mind wandering anywhere else? Can you just listen to what the person is saying as information? You don't have to agree with them. Can I just listen to what they're saying as information without judging what they're saying is right or wrong, good or bad? And the biggest challenge is when that person walks in the room that you absolutely cannot stand. They just rub you the wrong way and annoy the heck out of you. Can you listen to that person too? And for me, I'm always challenging myself. I even really work hard to listen to people who are racist. That's a tough one, but I try, I practice it with my family. You know, how many times are we always busy doing a bunch of things and, you know, you catch kind of like the tail end of what your kid's saying or your partner's saying, and then you answer, even though you didn't hear everything that they said. And then they know you weren't listening to them. And then you have relationship problems with people because you're not listening. I practice stopping and admitting, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening to you. Can you say that again? And then practice disciplined listening with my partner, with my kids. Lots of different ways you can practice that. But work is a really good place to do that, you know, because we're always looking to respond, or we're trying to debate with them or prove them wrong or make this a teachable moment for them. So really just practicing that discipline of listening. And then on the outside, again, those are the ways to decolonize, to cultivate safe spaces. So looking at an HR policy, looking at, you know, the work that we're doing, how do I promote well-being, inclusion, freedom, and validation? And then the 4 perspectives on the outside are the 4 perspectives that people are when they come into spaces. And I have a podcast that's done by Jen Green, and it's on our cultivating-safespaces.com website. And she talks about the 4 perspectives and why it's important to cultivate safe spaces. We just started it, but there's 2 podcasts launched that goes into detail about this diagram that I will share with you. But there's, you know, a whole bunch of things about even the perspectives and how to include them and cultivate safe spaces. But what it comes down to is like understanding self and going back to those questions and, you know, actively working on those things as you're moving forward in the work.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next question while we can get a few more in. The next person said, I loved this session, especially the comment that the Indigenous people are not the problem. I'm a settler, and as I learn now, I struggle with my upbringing. What resources or steps would you suggest for people like me?
Can you repeat that question?
Yes, of course. They said, I love this session, especially the comment that the Indigenous people are not the problem. I'm a settler, and as I learn now, I struggle with my upbringing. What resources or steps would you suggest for people like me?
Oh, I don't have the answer to that one. It really is like, it really is that, you know, just sitting down and journaling about it. Like if you're a processor, going to the water, going for a walk, and just focusing on that question. Like so many times people ask questions, but how many times have we actually sat down to actively think about that question and what our answer would be? you know, especially if we went to the water, or, you know, what are those things that we would do? There's so many resources out there. But some of the most powerful work that I've done with settler allies has been watching them on their journey of rediscovering who they were and their family. You know, there's so many reasons why people don't know about their history. You know, and it's usually because people don't want to talk about those hard things, or they want to forget about those hard things and tough things. But understanding those things and why, you know, certain teachings were passed down in our families, why our family was so serious, or why our family didn't cuddle or hug or say I love you, and all of those things. Like, there's reasons for all of those things, right? And so there's so many resources out there. Like, everything that I share is a combination of everything. Like, I always open myself. My mom always said, you need to know a little bit about everybody's teachings, not just your way, because your way is not the only way. And that was really strict in our family. Your way is not the only way. You need to be open. We went to catechism. We went to church. We learned about Buddhism. We learned about all of these other, you know, cultures and backgrounds. And, you know, there's things behind those teachings. And I always say to people, if you feel connected to Indigenous peoples, the mystical part of the plants and the land and nature and those things, and that's why you're drawn to Indigenous people, that's probably because it resonates with your spirit, because it comes from your own people. You know, before colonization happened across the world, people lived in tribes from Europe. You know, I want to go to Denmark. I want to go to Norway. I want to go to those places and find out their original teachings before they were colonized. You know, their things, their teachings. But, you know, I think Indigenous people, I said this on my social media, Indigenous people like to lay claim to all the knowledge. That's ours and that's ours and that's appropriation. And I understand that comes, a lot of it comes from identity and belonging, and some of that stuff. But I urge people to be careful about claiming things and say it's ours, because our people never hoarded knowledge. Our elders always said knowledge is no good unless you share it. There's a difference when people are taking it and using it in a bad way. And there's a way to approach that when that happens. But when people look far enough into their own histories, from their own villages, from their own original teachings, from the lands that they come from, they will realize why certain things resonate with them, because, you know, they have those within their own people. And that can be such a healing journey. I've seen people, you know, reconnect to their family roots and what it's done for them and the relationships they have with their kids.
I think that's a beautiful answer. Someone actually wrote in the chat to me a good resource that they have used in the workshop, really challenges what we were taught. So I'll just put it in the chat. It's Kathy Kilmurray, The Village. So this individual put this in the chat to show one of the resources they found really helpful. So thank you for that, Andrew, who sent that to me. For the next question, someone said, thank you for sharing your heart with us, Elaine. What advice can you give about decolonizing patriarchy? How do we help heal our men and boys?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question.
Loaded question.
It's really is a lot, in a lot of, like, I'm a storyteller. Those 4 perspectives, the traditional perspective, that's the storyteller perspective. That means when somebody asks me a question, my first instinct is to storytell. And I can talk for, I can do another 1-hour lesson on that question. One of the things I want to talk, like, I really, when it comes to, you know, patriarchy and understanding how we uphold patriarchy, one of the things when I talk about inclusion and doubling down on inclusion instead of exclusion, which is a colonial patriarchal thing, is exclusion, is inclusion. And I challenge our non-male counterparts to double down on inclusion. And one of the things I talk about inclusion is I talk about feminism. You know, when men have held a place of power for so long, you know, and when women wanted to reclaim spaces in positions of power and replace men, and, you know, move the women in and move the men out, that's still upholding patriarchy. That's still upholding colonialism. And it's still making decisions from fear, control, and scarcity. And when men feel excluded, when men feel, you know, they move into their trauma brain and they feel all of these things. There's so many things that people feel when they're excluded. How do you feel when you're excluded? Doesn't change for a man. People, human beings feel the same thing when they're excluded. And so if we're talking about dismantling patriarchy and colonialism, we have to practice that as well. As an Indigenous woman, you know, cultivating spaces for everybody to be in this space, because when I'm including, doesn't matter who they are, they feel included. So that's already, you know, they're going to be a little bit more open. You know, they're going to be a little bit more in this part of their brain where they're going to be open to hearing and contributing back. But if we're excluding and attacking and making everything about them bad, we move them into their trauma brain, and then they become a problem. You know, the problem employee. It's all that, you know, are we cultivating a safe space for everybody? That's my process, because I'm a traditional perspective, storyteller perspective. I'm also heavy relationship perspective. That's my way of doing things. It's not the only way. There are action people and innovation people who do things in very opposite ways of the way I do it. And that's not wrong either. That those ways of doing things reaches other people that might not be open to the way I do things. So when I talk about advocacy, we're really good at tearing each other down, even though we're advocating for the same thing, you know, like even within our own advocacy circles. Well, you know, I don't agree with that, you know, approach because of this, but I'm thinking about like the tradition person, you know, when it comes to advocacy, you know, they want to do ceremony. Their answer to the question is going to be ceremony. The relationship person is going to be like connecting, educating our allies. The innovation person is going to want to get into the system and try to change it from within. They become policy people. They work within government. They try to change it from within. Then there's our action people, which are usually direct action people who are like shutting the place down, blockade, you know, frontline warrior people. And we like to fight amongst each other, you know, sellout, you're a sellout, or, you know, you're too obnoxious, or, you know, you're just making us all look bad. Like we do that to each other. Then we start excluding each other. No way is the right way or wrong way. Everybody has purpose. And so I'm going to do what I do and continue to do it in that way, and trust that people who are doing their advocacy work in other ways, that's important. But it's important for me to say, not say, if you cared, you would be here. If this was important to you, you would be supporting me. That's promoting shame, right? Like we're making people be the way we are. That's upholding white supremacy characteristics. You got to be like me, if you know. And so I like the answer to everybody's questions are probably going to go back to understanding self. And so how do I make change? You know, if I made my advocacy work about changing all men and changing all of these things, then I would go crazy and depressed and, you know, give up and, you know, think that this world is going to hell. But, you know, when I focus on myself and I'm able to do the work that I need to do, and on learning and including and cultivating safe spaces and promoting validation and all of those things, that's the way that I would do it. And so it really is, it's like, what would you do? Like, what would you do? Think about, you know, how would I do this? Knowing myself and what are my gifts and what are my strengths? How do I see myself as part of this work? And you have the answers inside of you. Like, you know what the answers to those questions and the approach that you're going to want to take in that work.
Thank you, Elaine. Another great answer. The next question says, how can people who work in colonial systems evolve these systems? For example, police and healthcare in Canada will exist, but they'll need to evolve and help everyone without fear and control. Another big question for you.
I do. I actually, a lot of these questions I do as part of my work, right? Like groups and governments and justice groups invite me in to do a lot of training for them, and provide, provide a space where they can come up with their own recommendations so they can move it forward. But it's like that understanding self. When people come in, like when people come into roles, the first questions they should be getting asked when they move into these roles are, who am I and what's on my heart? Why do you want to be a police officer? Who are you and what's on your heart? Why are you wanting to do this? Where is that coming from? That work should be done first and foremost before anybody moves into those roles, right? Like a lot of people move into positions of power because they've been powerless. And, we see what happens when people are in those roles. Or a lot of our helpers, a lot of our social workers are people who have been in this social, like been involved with social workers in their life, and they want to do it differently, or they want justice, or they want to do it a certain way. And we see so many people working in social work burnout, because, who am I? Why am I doing this? Where is this coming from? What is my push? And it has to be about healing self before trying to help and heal anybody else. But often we move into roles and jobs to avoid dealing with self. We think that this job or this role or me doing this and being this is going to fix me. It's going to heal me by doing this job. And so, constantly doing that work on healing self, because otherwise you'll never be fulfilled, for one, or you'll be moving all over the place trying to figure out who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. And when you're in places that you're not meant to be and they start to struggle, like that's when a lot of problems come up, and people start really burning out, and it can get really tough. But I don't even know if that answers the question, because that's such a big question in another area and space. But it is always going back to understanding self, and then the systems that we set up and recreate, or take a look at, are we cultivating safe spaces through these policies or procedures, or the way we bring people in. I'll share that resource, that diagram, and I shared my website, and I also have a YouTube. I try to get as much free content out of there, and not pricey content. Like I have an intro to the course that I do online that people can take. And then I have some bigger ones for people who want to actually become trainers. And so, where you can start bringing this work. But I tell people, if you take this diagram and if you watch every single free YouTube video I have out there, and you watch everything that I have out there, then you can bring it and use it in whatever work that you want to do. I haven't copywritten any of my work. I don't own any of the knowledge. I've created it, and I've done all of this work to get it out there and to build that framework. But I will never come after anybody and sue them for using the work that I put out there, working to decolonize business practices and consulting, and not owning things. So if you use those diagrams that I've shared in the chat and go and learn more about it, and you want to bring it to your team and say, hey, I learned this thing from this presentation, and we should watch these YouTubes together and see how we can actively work at decolonizing some of our policies. You don't need to hire me and bring me in. If you can figure it out yourself, then awesome.
We did have a few more questions, but I know we're coming to an end, but there seemed to be an overall theme of asking about your books. I don't know if you wanted to quickly talk about what your book is going to offer. One person actually asked if you're going to do an audiobook, because she'd love to hear you speak while telling the story. So I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of talk about that before we finish up there.
I started my audiobook. It's hard. It's hard to do an audiobook. I got to chapter 4. And what's so funny is, in my book, I wrote about my ex-husband in my book, and how he left me for another woman, and all of this other stuff, and how I, found myself after that. And it was the best thing he could have ever done for me, was leave. And but my husband, or my ex-husband, works in audio. And so he's the one that's actually recording my audiobook for me. and he's listening to my story, and it's funny because he's getting worked up. Not like he's like getting worked up at all of the things that have happened to me in my life. He's one of my best friends now. We still annoy the crap out of each other, but he's still one of my best friends. And so it's been a really cool experience, but it's hard to do. I keep wondering if I can even finish doing it myself, or if I have to get someone else to do it for me. The first, when I wrote my book, the first 100 pages were the hardest for me to do. I had to do ceremony, I had to do trauma therapy, I had to go to AA meetings, I had to go to the land, I had to jump in the water. There's so many things I had to do the first part of my book. And I'm finding it again, reading it out and trying to do the audio. So I really want to do it because there's so many elders who've asked me to do the audiobook. And I actually just want to like do an elder reading group and like just jump on Zoom calls and like read to them for, an hour or something, because there's so many elders who've like just loved my book and supported me and want me to put it in audio. And I'm also working on my first edit for my second book. So my second book is called Self-Determination, A Pathway to Healing. So that'll be my second book that hopefully is coming out by the end of this year.
And is your book on your website as well?
Yep, there's a link to my website. So I have elainealec.com, which is my, it has all my information on it. And then the cultivating-safe-spaces.com has that has the podcast, has the trainings, has everything else on there. But my book and stuff is on the elainealec.com website.
Awesome, thank you. There was a couple other questions, but for those who are in Victoria, there is going to be a walk to end violence. And so I want to give some time so people can have some time to get down there. It's beginning at noon at the Mungo Martin House at the corner of Belleville and Douglas Street. And then they're walking to the BC Legislation Assembly. There will be ceremony and speeches until about 1 p.m. So we would love if you're able to be there in person. I know a few people messaged me and said they had to leave because they're heading down. So I want to give people some time to go if they're interested. But I just wanted to spend a second to thank Elaine again for coming here today and speaking on behalf of these issues and giving her story. It's so powerful, comes right from her heart. And I love that doesn't have anything written and just speaks what she feels compelled to speak. So really, really appreciate that. Anyone who has further questions for Elaine and really, really wants them answered, you can definitely email them to me and then I can forward them to Elaine. But yeah, before we head off, I do want to put up 2 questions on the screen here. 1 second. So they're just feedback questions. We just want to know what you thought about the workshop. And let me just put them on here when I figure out how to do that. There we go. So you guys should see those questions. I'll put them in the chat as well. And you can send them to me or you can email them to me. I'll also put my email on there as well. But once you've answered these questions and you've no other further questions, feel free to log off. I hope you'll join us for our further ceremonies today. We have the fasting break ceremony at 8 p.m. Pacific time tonight. And for those who aren't able to make it to the walk to end violence in Victoria today, it is live streamed. So I'm on the East Coast on the other side of the country. So I'll be watching it live streamed as well. So you can join me with that. But again, we just want to thank you guys for joining us today and really, really appreciate it. And again, thank you so much to Elaine for spending the time with us today.